Well, hi guys. That's like the nicest intro I've ever had, which is lovely. Can you all hear me okay? Cool. So yeah, first up is a big thanks to Flynn for having me and Creative Mornings and Tractor. I'm usually just not awake at this time, which is really weird for me. So please excuse if I'm not making so much sense. I'm probably going to say the word change like 60 times for each slide, which might drive you a bit crazy. But yeah, if we'll all pretend my usual time is like working after 12 at night. So we'll pretend we've like had red wine and beers and I'm very charming and it'll be great. So pretty much first up is the topic today is change. And this for me is quite a big one because I think about it a lot all the time. So I love and hate it pretty much. I feel like change is this really, really fantastic thing and this really, really difficult thing. And we're always kind of trying to deal with it. I feel like the way a lot of us work as creatives, which is probably a lot of you today, like thinkers, creatives, digital people, is we're always kind of, I don't know, working on the next thing. We're always working on that actual state of change. We're not really focusing on the end product. We're focusing on the steps to get there. And so I look at it very much like change, yep, the good and bad. So bad change personally is something as simple as, like, who is happy about Instagram threatening to change their feed to, what is it, the most popular posts coming up at the start, which I think is ridiculous. And that's just like tiny change, but that's something that will be there every day. But then there's also things like, if Beyonce didn't leave Destiny's Child, we wouldn't have Beyonce, which is like amazing change. So this is why I'm always torn, and I can't believe I'm using Beyonce as an example in like yet another talk. But so I pretty much look at change as this, if that's gonna play, amazing, like incredible life-changing thing where I'm like, everything could be different. Like I could just do one thing and everything will be different. Or I look at it pretty much as this like, I don't want to know. Like, I don't want to know about it. If people who know me very well, I kind of like buy the same pair of jeans every time I go shopping. I buy the same shoes that then end up kind of covered in paint and the same like amount of crap. Like, I very much do the same things on repeat. And there's people I've known since uni here today, which is like 5 or 6 years. So they know a lot of things about me like don't really end up that different. So I figured today what I'd talk about is pretty much how I look at change. And I'm not just doing this to be on brand and be black and white, but I really do look at it in two minds. I am really objective as well when it comes to looking at my work, looking at relationships, how you think, how you deal, everything around you. And I'm always weighing up both sides of a situation, I find. So instead of trying to be really, really against change, like is the easy way to say I just don't like it, I started to kind of try and look at where changes happen in my own creative practice and in my life and use that as examples today to talk to you about. So the first change pretty much is when I started working out of uni. I was working as a graphic designer, which was pretty short-lived. That's what I studied visual communications at UTS. And that really quickly turned into doing a lot of typography and lettering work. And then that led me to run off overseas to Berlin. And I worked in a studio, which then kind of turned into me just doing sign writing all day, every day, which started to drive me crazy. So I came back to Sydney, became an illustrator, and just kind of started to claim that. And then now working mainly as an artist and also doing commercial illustration projects. So you can see pretty much instantly that things have changed like over time, which really brings me to my first big point, and the thing I like deeply hate about change is that good change is slow. So the things that are really important, the things that kind of really do start to shape you and what you do and is really worthwhile is slow. So this is things like emotional development, the self-discovery, and getting a gym membership is like nothing great happens in a week. These things that are the really good change for you, it kind of takes time and you can't predict it and you can't plan it, but it's more you have to look back on it to realize that change happened. So I pretty much feel like that like a lot of the time. This is one of my favorite shows. So that's like, I've recently started working with an agent as well, and it's really funny having to kind of like vocalize to someone how I feel a lot of the time, and being just like, it's not right, it's wrong, it's not right, it's wrong. And having someone kind of tell you just need to keep on going and keep seeing what will happen. So I guess the best way to illustrate the change for me is when I started working, I was making things like this. And I also can't believe I'm showing this because I think it's horrific. So I was doing, this was working for a studio, so doing things like branding and style guides, which for some people is a lot of fun, but for me that is just torture. And this is this just to me is horrible. And I was also doing things, this is around 2011, and I've tried so hard to bury these things like on the internet, and then they keep kind of popping up. But I once upon a time did work in color, which was really bright and great, and I just don't anymore. And so it took me a really long time from that kind of 2010, 2011 to get to a point where this was one of the first studio jobs I did. And this is still 2011, but I thought this was the best thing I had ever done. And I thought I kind of made this big jump into something new where I was like doing type, it's really hand-drawn feel. It was really something new I'd never done before and no one had ever seen. But then it still took another 2.5 years of doing this, going overseas, working there, coming back to Sydney, getting a studio, saying I wanted to work for myself, and then experimenting with my own kind of illustration style to get to these works. And these were just for a little group show, but they were kind of, looking back, have actually been really pivotal works in my style and how I work as well. So this was the first time I really changed my process. So instead of assuming I could kind of churn out great work overnight, which is what I think a lot of people kind of do. We have the ideas and things are kind of there for a while, but it takes like that actually sitting down to get it done. So instead of doing things overnight, I spent, I think, 2 days on each of these, which is the first time I've ever worked like that. And then, I don't know, I just felt right about these. I also had a kind of good response to them, but it also led me on this path of kind of working in different ways. So sketching a lot more and experimenting a lot more and doing things that weren't necessarily about the end product, just kind of seeing what I could get away with, what it would turn into. So I started doing, these really experimental approaches where one of them is just like painting finished artworks and then ripping them up, which is instant change pretty much, but it kind of started to filter into a lot of my other works. So this is starting to come into last year, 2015. And then it started to inform things I was illustrating as well. So not just physically manipulating things, but also changed how I would work with pen and ink. And then also started to change how I was using my work. So the scales I was applying that on and kind of the events I was starting to get to do. So I was starting to get to work on these totally different, totally bigger scales where I had to, again, change how I work to kind of simplify things down to actually be manageable on that scale, which to me, it kind of changed how I was thinking as well. And what I realized like over time is, this is, I think, my 5th year out of uni, 5th or 6th, yeah. And it's also been just such a long time to realize that you've been working on something kind of constantly and non-stop. But the way I look at what I do now has really changed, where it's not just about the work I make, but I kind of have to admit to myself what I do like and what I don't like. So I know I don't like color, I just don't. Like, it has its place, sunsets and stuff, but I know my work, what I want to see from myself, just color isn't in it. And this really started to shape how I approach work. And this other thing I think everyone has is when you actually feel your perspective on things change, which is really weird. And it's kind of like Dear Diary stuff, which you don't talk to a room full of strangers about at 9 a.m. in the morning, being like, my feelings. But I started to realize that as soon as I was being honest with myself about what I do like and don't like, that really changed what I was looking at and what I started to take on board and what started to show in my work as well. So this is pretty much, these are just shots from my phone, which are like crappy quality. My phone's ancient, but I don't have like a baby or a dog to take photos of either. So this is what I do. I take photos of like, these are chips of ink, I think mixing paint and scraps from painting a mural. So I painted a wall, and instead of taking a photo of the wall, I'm taking photos of like the masking tape, which is just ridiculous. I like drunkenly take photos of cracks in bathroom tiles and wake up the next day with like 20 of these pictures. Instead of like taking photos of the dolphins that were like off at the end of these rocks, I'm taking photos of rocks. I'm getting like yelled at on streets for taking photos of people's like entries to their apartments. And I've realized that this is just what I do now, and these are things I never used to see before, but it's just completely changed how I look at the details of things. I can't watch a TV show without taking screenshots of things. So this is from Suits, and I think it's like Suits is terrible. I watch so much bad TV, but this is just a screenshot from a transition thing and some jazzy music was playing behind it. And so anyway, I think that just looks completely insane. This is from Making a Murderer. I got really into that, did that in a day, which then led me to watching like all these really bad 90s like murder crime documentaries. And this is just some texture from like an interrogation room, which I think looks really cool. And this is, whoa, from Arrested Development, which as well, a lot of my work, like if you know my work too, this kind of texture, I didn't actually get it from this, but this is another variation of something I do. And I just think it's great and it's beautiful, and it's a really shitty shot. Like if there's a cinematographer here, they probably, are shaking their head at me. But these are just the things I start to notice now, and these are things you can't predict. Like you can't tell yourself to go out and like look differently, but it's kind of this over time, you kind of train yourself to take things in a different way. And again, this brings me back to the thing I hate about change is that it is just all this unknown stuff. Like you don't know, you just have no idea, which is so frustrating. And like, I like to just know what is going on and what is coming up. And I've realized you just can't do that. And I'm also getting to a stage where it's like decisions will actually change your life. Like it's not like if you don't go to school, you're probably going to go to school the next day. We're getting to the point where it's like, if you take a job, that's going to like really impact things straight away. And that sounds really heavy, but that again is like how I feel all the time. I'm always thinking about, I try not to think about the decisions you made in the past, but it's that idea of what you decide to do now can change your future. But I also try to think, this is probably bad quality. I have a lot of these screenshots of things I just read over time. But it says, Simon, I don't know who Simon, there is a first name there, I don't know who it is. Simon received the Nobel Prize in 1978 for his contribution to organizational decision making. It is impossible to have perfect and complete information at any given time to make a decision. So I'm really bad at making decisions because I think the big thing is decisions cause change to happen. And so I have to remind myself with this a lot is that change does just make things happen for you. And it's that idea that if you change nothing, nothing changes. And it sounds really obvious and really stupid, but I think that idea is even scarier than the idea of change itself. And I think that even though decision making carries all these things like there's failure and there's fear and there's being uncomfortable and you might regret it and there might be criticism, it also actually just pushes things forward and keeps things moving, which is kind of the whole point to why we're here. And it also throws these things up where you get these curveballs, which I find that I actually thrive on for someone who stands here and like buys the same pair of shoes every year. I love that this work can kind of give you things where you get a phone call and like your next week will be totally different. You might be in like another part of the country, or you might even get a curveball that is like the job you've been working on for 3 months has just been cancelled out of thin air. But it's kind of, again, the way you choose to look at these things, if it's going to be good or it's going to be bad. And I think working in these cycles all the time and trying to embrace the change that comes with it is really the most important thing to like creative work as well, because we are about making things, we're about actually changing how people feel and look. So I think these curveballs are really like, I've found in my work, the stories in between the things you're supposed to do. So when I started doing this work, I was really like, I need to get this client and do this kind of job and look like this kind of illustrator. Like, you need to get names people will recognize. And then I've actually found the more rewarding work that I've done is biting off the things that are more than you can chew. They're jobs you didn't even know you wanted. So this is a sketch I did for a wall, and I did it about like A5 size, which is really easy. That's about like 20 minutes of your life. And then I turned up to paint at first coat last year, and my wall was, this was like after the lift had broken. I was trying to get a sense of scale, but the wall was 20 by 6 meters, which I'd never painted a wall kind of bigger than 8 by 3 in my life. And then I was standing in front of this just being like, what the hell am I doing here again? And I like eventually finished it and got a really low res night photo of it, which is great. I'll fix that this year. But it's kind of just turning up and seeing what you can do. And I found these changes also have led me to kind of trusting other people. So instead of just depending on what I think is best, I'm actually have changed how I feel about my work, and I'm listening to other people as well, where I've had things like the Penguin cover for The Big Sleep was having an art director tell you 3 hours before like something is due to just smash it, like just throw a hammer at it. And I was like, again, with that instant change, I was like, this is pretty much going to make or break what I'm doing. But it's kind of this change that takes you from one point to another, and you just have to, I guess, trust that it will work out a lot of the time. And it also got to things like we did an exhibition last year for Bootleg Mad Max at the Opera House, and we ended up all with really tight deadlines. And I decided in the short time frame I had that I would use a totally new medium I've never ever used before and paint on a leather jacket, which is very much James Strat feeling there. I like, had to get his permission to do it. But it's kind of just throwing yourself in there, and even though change is this scary thing for me, I try to use it as a catalyst to do these next things. And this has happened again as well, where it turns into getting to work with people that you've never actually worked with before, and you kind of get called up to do it and get on with it. So it's something I've found in this work especially, and a lot of you as you keep working will find, is that people do actually notice that you're there and that you're working, and then one day it feels really out of the blue, but they actually do notice that how hard you're working. So this was a mural with Sean Morris, and so I went down and painted that in Melbourne with him, and this is with Thomas Jackson on the right and James Strat. And so it was this change for me, actually wanting to work with other people is something I'd never really wanted to do, but eventually you kind of build up to that point as well. And it's just changing these little things in yourself, and how you look at your work really does start to build up. And for other people, you might work with someone and realize it's like the actual worst thing you could have ever done, but at least you kind of changed something and gave it a shot. So pretty much what I come to with all change, and as someone who hates change, I hate to admit this as well, but it's pretty much all contradictions, but it really is completely up to how you decide to approach it. So I've come to this point where I kind of realize you're meant to change, things are meant to change, you're meant to grow. It all sounds very kind of like live your best life kind of stuff, but I think that it is what really drives us, and I do think it makes us all better. So yeah, I've actually kind of talked myself around in the whole process of making this, that it's more about the light you frame these things in, and that's where change actually becomes something that we can all kind of embrace and use to push ourselves forward. So that's it.